We need to learn to position ourselves to hear. Learn to position ourselves to hear. Now, let me give you a little bit of context just in case you missed last week so you can understand where we are in this story, because we'll be here a few more weeks. The people of Israel is God's people. It's the called, chosen people. And in the for a few chapters before this, at the end of the book that's before this, called Judges, it defines the moment that we're in. It's a dark time. The people of God are doing what's right in their own eyes. They're not living for God. They're not living in the right way. That's all the way down from the farmers to the priest. Even the priests, the people that are doing the religious ceremonies, are not right before God. They don't have a king like the other nations, and yet God chooses to use this special family. They're really nobodies from nowhere. The dad's name is Elkanah in chapter 1, and the mom's name is Hannah. She is a woman that, as we talked about last week in navigating seasons of pain, came out of a deep depression because she was a woman that was barren, unable to have children, even though she asked God and was faithful to God. Year after year, she went to the place of God where the presence of God was and asked for a breakthrough. And year after year, nothing changed until one year she poured out her soul, and it says that God remembered her. And this woman that was depressed and barren, actually, by the power of God and nothing else, was able to produce a child, and she named him Samuel. Samuel, she told God when she was praying before she had him, said, Lord, if you give me a baby, I will dedicate him, give him over to you for all his life. So after she raised him for 2 to 3 years, she brought him to the priest as she had promised God and said, God, this child that is a blessing to mine, I'm giving to you, and he's going to be raised by the priest named Eli. Use his life for your glory. Many years later, as we pick up in these verses where it says the boy Samuel, he's now no longer an infant, but he's 12 years old. The times are still dark. The people are still living their own way. The priests are still distant from God and living in a way that's not honoring to God. And yet God is raising up in these dark times a boy that is going to be used powerfully for God. Can I stop there and say, listen, even in dark times, God is raising up people that are faithful and are trusting him and that are walking. So if you feel right now in your life, you're like, man, I feel like I'm the only one that's living faithfully. Listen, it is not in vain. I want to remind you that God sees nobodies like Elkanah and his wife Hannah, and he hears their prayer. So if you're getting tired and saying, is it all worth it? It is, because God Almighty is very aware of your faithfulness to him. And so we encounter a story here where all throughout the people of Israel, they had different leaders like Moses and Joshua that God would speak to them. If you've ever heard of the story of the burning bush with Moses or him going up to the mountain, God would speak to his people and give them direction of how to lead when they navigated difficult situations. But at this time, because of the sinfulness of the people, God chose to remain silent. And it was rare for somebody to hear a word from God. Visions were not things that happen. And I want to be clear, because this is important for us. If we're going to be in the right position to hear from God today, then we need to make sure that our heart's in the right place, because we will never be able to hear from God consistently in a way that it will transform and change our life in the lowest moments if we are living with unrepentant, unresolved, ongoing sin in our life. Say, Pastor, I thought this was going to be an encouraging word this morning. Well, for some, it will be a very encouraging word, because one of the things that blocks our ability to be able to hear God, it's like having noise-canceling headphones on, is when we are living in the wrong way. And God is giving us a picture here of the reason no one was able to hear is because the godly people, the priest, were actually living in a way that was dishonoring to God. They were taking the sacrifices, the best portion of the sacrifices, and instead of giving it to the Lord, they were keeping it from themselves. And this was a horrible, horrible, horrible sin in the eyes of God. They were showing contempt for God and contempt for the people. And God said things have to change. So what God withheld from them, think about this, what God withheld from them is the power of hearing his word.